or sort of answering the line of business questions around the applications of business functions in the area of supply chain management or logistics. And then in the second half of today's webinar, we'll actually be looking at a live demonstration, and so we'll be answering more of the IT question of the how-to in how does this all get done. And so we look forward to sharing with you today, and hope that if you have any questions, you'll feel free to type them into the chat box or the question box, and at the conclusion of our formal presentation, we'll get to your questions and try to answer them to the best of our ability. So thanks again for joining us, and let's go ahead and begin delving into today's topic. The first thing we wanted to mention is that Magic Software is presenting today's webinar. We are a company that empowers customers around the globe with our smarter technology. It delivers a multi-channel user experience, and it's designed to empower enterprise business process, logic, and data across the enterprise. And we'll mention specifically how that is accomplished. But we do that on the basis of a background of proven experience with very innovative technology. We tend to focus on business needs, as we will in today's webinar in the beginning. And we do that with solutions which are designed as application development platforms and business integration platforms. And so these are the tool sets that we bring to market. As a company, Magic Software has a long history. We were established in 1983. We have now serviced in over 50 countries worldwide through 15 offices. And very much our public companies. All of our accomplishments are available to you online in terms of our financial reporting and stability. Those numbers are excellent. If we were to look at that, we'd see that in 2013 we had $144 million in revenue with net income of $16 million. We're noted for the quality of our support, the training, the global services and professional services that we provide throughout the world through our professional services teams. And so all of that, of course, is based on the software technology that we'll be talking about today. So Magic Software has been fortunate to have a good relationship with the Microsoft SharePoint teams. Jared Spataro, who's the Director of SharePoint Product Marketing at Microsoft, is quoted in one of Magic's global press releases as saying that SharePoint is an easy and effective way for users to interact with the processes and data important for their business, and that solutions like Magic XPI will enable customers of all sizes to create SharePoint applications that access legacy business applications. Now, as we look at the megatrends that are really taking place and affecting the SharePoint market, there are a number that we would point out. First of all, there is an increasing trend towards mobile and distributed workforce. 67% of CIOs and IT professionals are pointing to mobility and how it will impact their businesses as much or more than the Internet did in the 1990s. 72% of companies are deploying at least one social software tool. We see the consumerization of IT trend impacting IT departments and businesses in a number of ways, meaning that as the new multi-generational workforce comes into play, the millennials who are entering the workforce each year, some 4 million of them, are really expecting a more modern, more social, more interactive and rich kind of business application experience. 75% of enterprise IT managers are telling us, in addition, that their companies are using at least one cloud computing platform today. Many are using multiples, see the cloud as their future direction for their company's IT infrastructure overall. And yet, as we look at the numbers, 70% of IT budgets are spent maintaining what I think we can call somewhat inflexible and siloed data center solutions today. So there's still a major infrastructure cost and a complexity to that infrastructure that we're all very familiar with because we deal with it every day and know that there has to be a better way. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, is how we can leverage SharePoint in a manner that makes it accessible across the enterprise, in portals, in content repository functions, in creating intranets and extranets, and even public-facing websites that will allow us to overcome some of the challenges that are inherent in these kinds of megatrends. The problem, of course, is these siloed data environments where it's really limiting business performance, and that's creating a lot of pain in organizations because that data gets stuck in those siloed systems. It frustrates not only the end users who are hoping to get access to that information in wherever they happen to be working at the moment, whichever system they're using, but also the IT departments who are expected to make that work and for whom the software really originally wasn't designed to do that. And so these disconnected teams are resorting quite often, unfortunately, to ad hoc, inefficient, and unreliable processes that are outside the control of IT. Cloud and SaaS-based applications are enabling some of that, and things are at times a bit chaotic. So unfortunately, with this disconnect that's there, decisions are being based on inaccurate data, and there's some resulting loss in competitive advantage, of course, as a result of that. So the challenge is that the majority of the organization's business users do not have direct access to important business data. Only a small percentage of the organization and its users are licensed or can access the business data directly in the underlying systems, the ERP systems, the CRM systems, the supply chain management and logistics systems that all make up a normal enterprise application portfolio. And yet we find that these systems are not commonly talking to one another, or when they are, there's only a limited exchange of information, and the true picture of the business process is not being captured. Quite often there's reentry of data, or there's differing data across the organization. So the ideal then is to enable business-critical SharePoint solutions by connecting SharePoint to line of business applications. And of course, SharePoint doesn't connect directly to line of business applications, which is why we show the Magic XPI icon right there in the center, representing the integration that needs to take place. As we look at the business applications in our environment, the PeopleSoft, the Dynamics, the SAP, the JD Edwards, the Oracle EBS, the Manhattan and Red Prairie, and on and on. These tend to be very business-oriented. They are used by specialized users, either accountants or warehouse managers or field service engineers and so on. The data structures of these systems are necessarily complex, and the APIs are, first of all, complex, but also just different. They don't talk directly to one another. Each API deals with its own data format. Each API deals with its own method of interchange, and so there's a need for intermediation there. As we look at SharePoint, it provides the ability to organize ad hoc data, which is a very powerful user-facing kind of experience. It's process enabling, it's productivity driven, and it's a familiar platform to many across the organization. So this opportunity then exists if there's just a way that we could provide SharePoint access to the information that's sitting in these underlying systems in an organized fashion, in a fashion which uses and applies business logic effectively. And so there you need process integration, you need the ability to streamline the complexity and eliminate programming in order to accomplish some of the objectives that we're after. What are those objectives? Well, you see them there on the right. The surfacing of the business data, the ability to increase access to business-critical data by connecting back-end systems to SharePoint, whether it's 2010, 2013, 2020, who cares? And then improving the processes, implementing, extending, and improving business processes by building solutions on SharePoint, and delivering a faster ROI. Faster return on investment comes, and decreased business risk comes for line of business applications in SharePoint because of the integration platform's capabilities for working in a visual drag, drop, and configure methodology, which Ryan will be showing us. So business-critical SharePoint solutions are responding to business needs across a wide variety of areas throughout the organization. And today we're going to be taking a deep dive and look into those areas as they relate to supply chain management and logistics. So supply chain and logistics apps, there's a demand for both mobile and on-premise apps. SharePoint apps that overlap with core business functions, however, will require back-end integration to be effective. So as we look in the area of supply chain management, according to the 4th annual UPS Global Change in the Supply Chain Survey, 2/3 of all companies plan to improve their post-sales returns capabilities this year, while 71% have plans to reduce lead times. So for many of you, we know that this is on your agenda. We've helped companies with this before. Very proud when companies come back to us and say, we were able to push back our order cutoff by an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever it was compared to prior, simply because we've improved the business process integration between our systems, and we know that we can get things out the door in a much shorter lead time. That's powerful for any business, as all of you know, and so we're really excited to be able to share those kinds of case study stories and examples across a number of different areas. We also see this in the area in terms of being able to reduce returns and to anticipate returns that are coming in, because the RMA tracking is taking place so that you know how many returns you have coming in at any one point, and being able to reduce that. But in order to do that, there are some requirements that we need to look at. Certainly, barcoded inventory capabilities, sometimes RFID, the ability to deal with cycle counts and shipment tracking and PO processing and receiving and putaways are all business processes that are crucial to supply chain management and warehouse management issues that we'll look at as well. So ERP data and 2D barcoding are going to continue to form a foundation for supply chain analytics, which will be increasingly in demand in SharePoint apps. The ability to access that information, expose it in a SharePoint dashboard or a SharePoint application or portal will be crucial in many organizations. So we look at warehouse management. In the past it was all paper-based reporting, and maybe for some of you it still is, that there's these paper-based reports for warehouse managers, but this is being replaced by portals and mobile apps that provide real-time alerts, reports, drill-down capabilities. The workflow capabilities of SharePoint are excellent for this, and also the ability to access that back-end data and display it in dashboards is useful as well. We're seeing growth in the warehouse management market as companies seek ways to improve business processes and go beyond the normal capabilities of ERP systems. This market still is expanding, and with proper integration, SharePoint apps can make warehouse management system information visible across the enterprise and not just to a specialized set of users within the organization. As we look at logistics more broadly, applications aid in various business processes such as cartonization, rate comparisons, third-party logistics, tracking, and other logistics execution and management issues. SharePoint apps in these areas are going to be able to provide not only workflow enhancements, but also the visibility and dashboarding capabilities that many organizations are looking for. Track and trace, of course, is probably at the heart of most logistics functionality. The classic question, where is my stuff? And proof of delivery apps for shipping companies using GPS and barcoding and RFID and signature capture and camera and all the other interfaces capabilities can be combined with tracking apps for managers, 3PL shippers, and consignees to provide transparency. And that's the goal typically of track and trace is transparency, and you want that in real time, adding to enhanced security for shipments. And so having portal visibility into that means that people who are not logistics managers are involved in the logistics chain itself, but who have vested interest in that, particularly people in sales and service organizations, now have enhanced visibility into this information, not just in terms of small package delivery, but in terms of all the various kinds of transportation and shipping approaches that are out there that go beyond just the common small package delivery tracking that most of us as consumers are familiar with, but from a logistics standpoint, we know it goes much further and beyond that. Now, transportation management systems themselves are excellent. They can benefit from SharePoint portals as well, things that can be utilized for routing, scheduling, confirmation notes, and other transportation management system functions. This can also be distilled into mobile apps for easy access to current information. And that kind of visibility requires integration, obviously, to the back-end systems as well. So what we've noticed, particularly in the mobile area, that as device costs are dropping, both fleet drivers and owner-operators have their own smartphones, their tablets, their onboard computers. And according to a recent survey by Green Road, who really follows this area very closely, 67% of fleet managers are reporting that all or most of their drivers are making work-related use of smartphones today. The lower device costs are making it more affordable to deliver on-board apps as well than ever before. And according to Green Road, fleet managers are leading the adoption of mobile apps, with about 60% of them using non-email work-related apps on their smartphones. So as fleet managers sort of lead the way into this area, we expect to see on-board apps increasingly used as well. And this will, in many respects, revolutionize, and has already in a number of fleets, revolutionized what's taking place out there. So look for this to impact SharePoint users as well, as you now have the ability to display SharePoint, of course, on mobile devices, and those dashboards and portal sites are going to become extremely useful to a number of users. So order tracking is a great example of a SharePoint app that is going to require a number of integration touch points. These can support customers, partners, employees. They're going to use technologies like barcoding and RFID and signature scanners typically. And in terms of integration targets, we look at ERP, CRM, the e-commerce platform, the small package delivery web services, the common carrier web services, obviously your logistics systems and warehouse management systems themselves. EDI messaging comes into play here, as well as email and other messaging approaches. And so all of these can become integration targets in terms of the sources of information for both inbound and outbound messaging from SharePoint and a SharePoint app. So having a solution that can handle all that becomes extremely important. And in terms of the area of order fulfillment, SharePoint apps for order fulfillment assist the warehouse and other staff with checking inventory, pulling, picking, labeling, shipping, confirming orders across the fulfillment cycle. And so this gets pretty exciting as we start to see SharePoint being used in some more specific line of business ways. But again, the integration is going to be required across all of the systems that we mentioned, including the warehouse management systems themselves on the back end. Now, in terms of sort of a broader brush look at logistics, SharePoint apps for logistics are focused on transportation, warehouse management, and order fulfillment, and they're relying upon a lot of CRM data for customer information, and CRM systems are also needing logistics data for a complete view of the customer. So the integration targets for SharePoint to be able to provide interaction with these various logistics systems are, of course, ERP, CRM, and as we said, some of these same systems across the enterprise for overall logistics. Now, e-commerce is an area that is really impacting supply chain management and logistics users as the processes for ordering become automated and online and accessible to literally millions of users. There can be some some pretty interesting IT challenges that result from this. And SharePoint portals can provide supply chain and logistics visibility into your e-commerce and m-commerce activity, m-commerce being mobile commerce. Now, businesses without linkage between their online commerce websites and their mobile apps for purchasing, their CRM and their ERP systems risk dealing with customers in a frustrated and fragmented way. So the integration targets here are, in addition to the ERP and CRM system, your various e-commerce platforms. And there's a wide variety of these. We've worked with these companies and find that there are differences, dramatic differences in the way that they integrate, and yet having an integration platform has just aided us tremendously in being able to deal with the differences in these various APIs. Field service is a very important area for SharePoint apps, typically as they relate to the field service supervisor or to the general line of business managers and C-level executives even who are trying to look and get a sense of what's going on in the field. In some businesses, it's their core product is really field service, and so it's relevant to a larger number of people in the organization than just the field service workers themselves. And so these are typically going to cover things like service requests and routing and dispatch messages and so forth. Whoops. There we go. Sorry about that. So field service is going to include parts inventories, work order completion, time accounting, and sometimes billing and dashboards and other functions as well. The integration targets for these field service users are typically going to be things like ERP, CRM, email messaging, inventory, and transportation management. So these are areas to look out for as you're looking at integrating field service applications across the entire life cycle of those field service processes. Some of the other examples, Manhattan scale integration is an area where we have customers that have some fairly sophisticated integration requirements here. Cleveland Golf, this is sort of their swim lane diagram of what's going on in their integration processes, all using Magic XPI integration, and our professional services team assisted them on the implementation of that. So Magic Software is bringing two solutions to market to help deal with all of this. The integration platform, or Magic XPI, which we mentioned briefly earlier, and the application platform, or Magic XPA, which delivers the multi-client mobile app capability as well as the web apps and client-server application capabilities. Both are metadata-driven solutions, meaning that you can implement an application without having to deal with the underlying complexity of the platform itself, but rather with the focusing on the business logic level of your implementation. So the Magic XPI integration platform that Ryan's going to show us uses a library of pre-built adapters and resources so that there's no line-by-line coding involved. This drag, drop, and configure visual integration like Design Studio, which is extending the capabilities of your enterprise systems, simplifying development and maintenance of integration to third-party applications in a variety of different ways, and bringing really the benefits of service-oriented architecture, reusability, discoverability, security, scalability of applications, and other qualities that you would look for in this type of enterprise-level solution that is both mobile and cloud-ready in terms of its integration capabilities. So as we look at the variety of methodologies, and these go beyond web services, but certainly include standard approaches to web services and service-oriented architecture, such as SOAP and REST methodologies and their component technologies, we also support a wide variety of, if you will, legacy technologies, including things like message queues and the various transport protocols, HTTP, FTP, and so on. So we'll look at that library. It all fits together in a nicely architected approach in which the platform supports the use of a variety of connectors and adapters and allows you to accomplish at the various layers of your integration definition, the data management, the orchestration of the business process, and the exposure of those processes as services, the consumption of services, making sure that all the security and monitoring capabilities are there and the ability to work through a nice visual studio-like interface environment. So with that, I'm going to actually share now so that we can change the presenter to Ryan, and he is going to be able to share his desktop and take it from here. So I want to thank you for your attention so far. Invite Ryan to share his desktop, and when he does that, then you'll all be able to see it. I think I see it now, Ryan, so I'm going to say take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So what I'm going to do today is show a live demonstration of using Magic XPI to integrate SharePoint to some other applications. First, we're going to look at integrating it with E1, which is J.D. Edwards Enterprise 1. And that's basically going to be our logistics backend. It's going to be the ERP. And then we'll also look at integrating it with Salesforce.com as well. So I'm logged in right now into a SharePoint environment. It's actually hosted with using Microsoft. I just went ahead and rented a SharePoint server from them. And we're connecting to it using the Magic XPI connector, which supports not only on-premise SharePoints, like you probably have in your office, but it also supports the online model, which uses the Office 365 security model. So it supports both environments fully. And what I'm doing is we're actually we have an XPI server that is looking at SharePoint, and it's looking for me to create new contacts here in this list that we've created. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just go ahead and put a new contact in here. And after I do, as soon as it's created, it's basically going to have a situation where this record is going to get picked up by Magic XPI. It's then going to kick off what we call a flow or an orchestration, where it's going to go and run a process against J.D. Edwards, where we're going to call a J.D. Edwards API. It's going to create a business partner, which will assign, it'll do data validation. It'll assign a new number. It'll make sure that everything gets put into the correct internal tables of J.D. Edwards. We don't have to go do that. It handles all of that for us. And there we go. And after I say OK, you'll notice, by the way, I'm leaving a couple things empty. I'm going to leave this process box unchecked. I'm going to leave the J.D. Edwards address book number empty. And I'm also going to leave the Salesforce link empty as well. So I'll say save. You'll notice it'll get saved again without those fields populated. After a couple of seconds, we'll give the integration like 5 or 10 seconds to run. Magic XPI is going to realize this new record it was created. It's going to go ahead and run against the Edwards APIs and against Salesforce, actually. And then it's going to come back and tell us how it went. It'll tell us if it worked. So process should switch to yes. And if J.D. Edwards worked, we'll get a J.D. Edwards ID. If Salesforce worked, we'll get a Salesforce ID. So I'm going to hit refresh on my browser. And you'll see now process switched to yes, which is good. J.D. Edwards has a new ID, 77286, so I can go look up that number in J.D. Edwards under our address book revisions. Let's see if it got created over here. I think it said 77286. There it is. You can look at this record and see all the same data from the other side. So here it is. It's a customer type. And here's the address I typed in on SharePoint. So I moved it all over, mapped it between the two. And then also as a bonus, it also created the record in Salesforce, and it actually left me a link straight to the record in Salesforce using the unique ID. So if I click that, actually I'm going to open a new tab so I don't leave this one. I'll of course need to be logged in. I know the URL to where Salesforce is at, but once it actually hits that API, we'll be able to put our credentials and see the record. So what's basically happening here is it's a real-time sync. We're creating a real-time sync between data inserted into our SharePoint to other applications, and those could be really anything. It's basically just a Swiss knife of integration. It has all types of different connectors that can work with, let's just say, about any application that has any kind of API or database, or any type of, basically any way that we can hook in and be able to move data around. So I'm now logged into Salesforce. I don't know why Salesforce is moving so slow, but basically, if you look now, this is the record that I created in SharePoint. It moved it over, and you can see it was created just right now, about a minute ago by me, or about 2 minutes ago. And of course, then we have all the same information I input on the other side. So what it did is XPI returned this link to this record straight into SharePoint, so I can actually now just click, do in one click, get to that record and see it on the other side. So they're tied together like that. I could also do it the other way, actually, if I wanted to. In Salesforce, I could actually put a link back to the record here in SharePoint, because actually this is a unique record here. So I could have done that as well. So let's talk a little bit about what had to happen to make this work. So somewhere in the middle, there's this server called Magic XPI that's running here in Southern California in our office, and it's connecting to our JD Edwards, and it's connecting out to the cloud to SharePoint.com. So in order to make it connect to those other applications, we designed what's called a flow. And right now I'm going into the behind-the-scenes view, sort of pulling back the covers and showing you our developer studio. It's a visual environment where basically we define what the applications are that we want to connect to, credentials and where they're at, and host names and things like that. And then we draw lines between them and say, okay, we want to connect this object to here. So to start, I needed to have some credentials put in for SharePoint. So we've got our SharePoint Online, which is this guy here, and of course we do support on-demand and on-premise. So either platform is supported. Once that's created, I can actually go ahead and just drag any SharePoint component over from the left side, which is sort of like the palette. This is the unconfigured components over here, and they're very numerous. And I can grab the SharePoint one, drag it over, and drop it on a flow over here on the right, and that puts it sort of into the program. So as the data runs through from application A to application B, it goes through these components and executes them in order and does whatever I tell it to do. So I want it to go to my SharePoint Online one, so I'll go ahead and make sure it's going to the SharePoint Online application, hit Configure, and go into and choose any list I want. It's actually retrieving the schema of SharePoint, and it's looking at all the lists I have on there. So Magic Contacts was the one we were using. You can see there's some other ones on there as well. It just does a discovery and finds out what's available on the server. If I go ahead and do an add, or a query or an update, these are all just operations I can do against that list. I can add data, I can update data, etc. Also, it's fully compatible with libraries as well. So if you want to use a document repository, we can work with any kind of Word doc or Excel doc or any type of document that's stored in a library, and just say OK. And then go ahead and map, and it'll allow me to bring up that SharePoint list in a data mapper. So on the right is SharePoint, and I see all the fields there, and I can map into them. So just to save a couple of minutes, I'll just go ahead and go over and show you one that's already configured. Here's one right here where we're returning the information from both Salesforce and from JD Edwards back to back to SharePoint. So here I have mapped out the ID number that came from Salesforce, and I have the address book number that came from J.D. Edwards, and I've mapped them into the fields right back into SharePoint, as well as I'm passing some other information, such as what is the ID number of the one on, what's actually the ID number of the one of the record I want to touch, so that information is basically telling it which record to go back and update. And then I can show you data going the other way as well. So here's a J.D. Edwards component. It's calling a business function in J.D. Edwards, and it's saying this is how we map data back into our application from SharePoint on the left, which is our source, into the right side, which is J.D. Edwards. And this is kind of cool because it lets me do visual mapping between the sites. So say I decided that in J.D. Edwards, in this one, I saw there was nothing on address book line 2, 3, or 4, or nothing in country. So if that was the case, I could basically then go back to my mappings and really easy say, okay, well, let's put the company name on address line 2, or let's go ahead and put you know, something from here under address line 4. Just modify my mappings really quickly. I then hit OK, rebuild it, run it again, and then my changes are applied that quickly. So the cool thing about it is really anybody who's not a developer can look at this and understand it. A BA can see what the mappings are. And the cool thing about this is that if you come back, you know, 6 months later and you want to change something, it's easy to do. It's not lines and lines of code where it takes you know, a seasoned developer to interpret what it's doing. It's actually very visual and sort of self-documenting as you go, so you can go in and see, okay, well, this is where we're moving the data from one application to another. It's very simple, and it basically brings everything to a much higher level than you would have in other applications such as .NET or Java or Bash programming or something like that. There's a wide array of components that exist that we can use to create these applications or create these integrations. Some of them are very specific to platforms like J.D. Edwards World or J.D. Edwards E1, of course SharePoint, and of course Salesforce, like we showed you. So those are specific ones. But we also have generic components that can really go out and do anything. So working with a data mapper allows us to work with flat files, databases of all types, including Oracle, MS SQL, stuff like that. Email, working with HTTP and FTP, working with web services, and basically really any type of XML or flat file or any type of message that would come across. So we can really handle it all. And the idea here is that we are basically have all these adapters that can go out and hook into any type of application. We have the orchestration here, which is where we build our flow in the middle. So it allows us to define the business rules on how I'm going to move data from one side to the other. It's event-driven as well, so you can decide that that the whole process is kicked off by another application. So obviously, if I have something happen in Salesforce, I have what's called a Salesforce trigger that would allow me to just go run a flow. So anytime someone adds something to Salesforce, we can be triggered and know about it. So as well as if anything happens in SharePoint, I can be notified about it as well. So it really becomes a tool that allows us to much more quickly create these integrations. So something like this, like the integration we showed you that went from Salesforce to J.D. Edwards, I think we did in just a day or two. We already had a lot of knowledge on J.D. Edwards and SharePoint, but really the idea was that we didn't have to spend tons and tons of development effort to get these connected because we're leveraging code that already exists by the built-in components. The component knows how to talk to SharePoint. The component knows how to talk to Salesforce.com, and we're just leveraging it and doing that. Also, another thing about the component architecture is it insulates you from problems such as like versioning. So maybe you want to upgrade from SharePoint 2004 to 2007 to 2010 to 13. So as you do that, it becomes if you do like a point-to-point integration, it becomes problematic where now nobody wants to do the upgrade because, oh, it's going to break that integration we wrote or whatever. So the component itself has the versioning built into it. It doesn't care what version of SharePoint you've connected it to, it'll basically still be able to work because it knows how to log into 2010 or 13. So as you upgrade from one version of SharePoint to the other, you don't have to go back and rewrite your whole flow or anything like that. Your flow stays the same. The component architecture just knows now how to connect to that new version. Same thing with most of our applications. So, like for instance, if you're using a newer API as Salesforce, or you upgrade from one version of JD to another, you don't end up changing your project, which is what we call this. It's just some configuration changes on where it pointed to the new version and things like that. So that's basically the architecture that we use. It is multi-threaded, so you can have lots of things going on at once. So if we're moving data from, let's just say from Salesforce to SharePoint, and then we have data going back the other way, they don't slow each other down because the application is actually going to be running on multiple threads, as we call them, which means that basically you can have simultaneous transactions going on at once. And that's pretty common because once you do an integration, you get your Magic XPI server installed, and you get your first flow up and going. Most likely, you'll want to do something else. Now you'll have a new need that comes up, and it's identified, and you'll want to use the architecture you already have. Well, you can do that very easily by just adding new flows or adding new projects. The footprint of a Magic XPI server, as I should mention, is actually quite small. I mean, the installation's like 500 megs, and really most of that's just a lot of the different components we use, and you won't need all of them. So it's not like a whole ecosystem, like if you used other integration methods where you need all types of different servers and you need all this and all that. The pre-requirements, the prereqs are very simple. It's all included in the one installation, and basically from there you can deploy it. It can run on a Windows VM. It can run on other operating systems as well. But the actual requirements to get it up and running are very simple, and most installations take like less than a half hour. So it's pretty straightforward and easy to deploy, and it makes developing any type of integration very, very simple and almost fun. Glenn, do we have any questions?
Yeah, actually we do. I'm going to go ahead and change the desktop over to me, because one of the questions that came in was related to EDI. Can you see my EDI integration document there?
I do.
Okay, so the question was what EDI documents are supported. So I thought I'd bring this up. The document numbers are shown there over on the left. It says typical incoming EDI documents supported include 753, 810, 812, 820, 824, 830, 850, 852, 860, 864, 754, 856, and 865. And I know you EDI fiends know what all those numbers stand for, so I won't read each one as far as the name. But and these are just the most common ones. They basically, I think the answer, Ryan, is that it'll support any EDI document type. Is that right? You can use any.
Yeah. Those are all definitely X12 types that are supported, as well as we can read and generate really any type of flat file. So.
Okay, great. So then the question was, is the webinar recorded? The answer is yes. Then they wanted to know, does it use BCS, Business Connectivity Services, in SharePoint?
We can, yes. So certainly. So if you want SharePoint to call a web service and get some information from another application, we can basically do that. So you can use BCS to call us. We can call back to SharePoint, of course. But if you have something that like, for instance, an application that BCS is not capable of calling, you can have Magic XPI sort of be the intermediary to retranslate that to whatever you need.
So basically, you don't have to use BCS, but if you've got something already developed, and you might be able to leverage using that as well. Okay, sure. Very good. Thank you. And I think that's all the questions I see. So I want to thank you very much, Ryan, and thanks all of you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon on another Magic webinar. Have a great day.